That's one of the reasons I was so stunned when the secular community a while back went through the whole let's craft sexual harassment policies for all of the conferences. And there was such a hubbub over it. People didn't want it, or they thought it was silly, or that it's going to interfere in my ability to get laid or flirt or whatever. And I was disappointed to see certain people who were really not for those crafting those harassment policies. And they are exactly there for that purpose, to protect people from
on the receiving
ignorance,
end,
right?
On the receiving end, but also, like we were saying, the people that are just unaware that they could violate a boundary. It's like, okay, we're going to write the boundaries down for you. Make it easy to follow, you know? So as long as you follow the handbook.
It's kind of like what you were saying the last time we were talking about, you know, people that were oppressed who then go on to repress that and then harm other people, right? And so at a certain point, your policy has to just basically say it doesn't matter if you like this or not. It's about protecting the people that you're going to make uncomfortable or somehow damage in a way that we want the conference to be inclusive, right? And I saw a really great little, it was a professional video actually, but it was about inclusion. And so it had to do with including diverse people and how when you have a more inclusive situation, when you build a product that includes people instead of excludes people, you know, how that's like a better model, because you get more diversity, you get more people comfortable with it, you can sell more product when you make the product more inclusive of people. And what's really weird to me is that, you know, if I'm building a piece of software and I want to make it friendly to deaf users, or I want to make it friendly to like vision impaired users, or, you know, to anybody, somebody who might be like who learns more slowly, or I'm going to have to think about that when I design the interface for this. And so you have this situation where if you have a person who basically says, I'm not going to buy your software if you make it inclusive, I mean, there's no way you can deal with that customer, right? It's like, okay, then we're going to be exclusive in your case, because the goal here is to make as many people comfortable in a huge group setting as possible. And if your goal is to say, I don't care how uncomfortable I make other people, then you would be one of the few people we'd be willing to exclude.
Well, and you know, we see this actually, certain people's responses to some of the movies that have been released.
Oh, Lordy.
In the last year. I mean, the latest Star Wars, Black Panther, Star Wars, Wonder Woman, and you know, people are just losing their shit over the fact that the main protagonist of these movies is not a cishet white dude. And it's like, oh, they'll never make any money. And it's like, oh, but they will. They are.
You're doing just fine. Just you keep on bitching.
But it's like, okay, let's broaden your concept of what it means to be, you know, a superhero, or you know, the main protagonist of a movie.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have to be somebody that looks just like you. Representation counts. And I think that's why you're seeing so much love for Black Panther, which I haven't seen yet, and I really want to take my kid to see that.
Yeah.
But
it shows a stunning lack of, of understanding of your own privilege, because if you're white, I do this with my kids. I think I'm probably one of, maybe Jen, I bet you do this too. But when I'm watching The Avengers or any of these movies, I say, wow, there is not a person of color in sight.
Yeah.
And there's not, imagine if you were black and you were watching this, how would you feel?
I can add something to that, because I watch a television show where there was recently a young black woman who was on, and she was describing her experience, right? So she basically said that when she was growing up, she had no role models when it came to the idea of people who looked like her falling in love, right? She said, I never saw this outside, you know, I'd go to the movies and everybody who had these experiences and all these romances and all that stuff, none of them looked like me. I think that would be a hard thing to imagine. I mean, I'm somebody that, they do kind of look like me. So it's hard for me to even imagine that. I remember when Black Barbies came out, right? And it was just like, whoa, they have a Black Barbie doll now, right? And I mean, now you go to the store, there's diversity in dolls, at least to some level. But yeah, this idea of not seeing yourself portrayed. And even to some extent, I think that, portrayals of women in movies are set to a certain way. And so we don't see ourselves in certain, roles, which, and it's almost painful the way that those are thrown out now as sort of a bucking that system, although that's the only way to do it. But it's just so odd to me that when a film like that comes out, it's considered like a social surprise, right?
Yeah.
Like, wow, hey.
Let me hand you a little bit of hope on a silver
female.
platter. When we were growing up, when Alien came out,
Yeah.
that movie just rocked my world because it was a powerful woman. I was like, yes. I went to see that movie in the theaters back when you only could see things in the theater a bunch of times. And then Terminator, the woman.
Yes.
She was badass. And I just thought that was awesome. And I really clung
I wouldn't
to
want her
this.
coming after me. You talking about the
Right?
female Terminator? Because
Right.
she was
No,
scary.
no.
Well, she was pretty scary,
Linda
though.
Hamilton.
Linda Hamilton.
So,
oh, yeah.
So she was, so she was like typical, like suburban, not,
Oh, yeah. No, you just mean like the main character.
Yeah.
the-
So the first movie,
guy's
she didn't
mom.
look like anything special. Second movie,
She bulked
she's
up.
like,
Well,
oh
she had
my
been
God.
she'd been in the, she had nothing else to do but work out all day when she was locked
Yeah,
up.
yes, that was awesome.
No, they did good.
But yeah.
Right. So to me, those movies were so important and empowering. And when Wonder Woman came out, I sat and through many of the scenes, I'd sit there and cry because I'm like, yes, this is what I wanted as a girl. This is what I wanted when I was a kid. And we get through watching it, and my daughter, and I'm like, what did you think? She's like, it's awesome. And it's just like, it's wallpaper to her.
Well, I wonder
Because that's her world now. Her world now shows lots of powerful
That
women
is cool.
and lots of people of color
And-
and things.
and that's
More
why-
than mine. It's still not there. Don't get me wrong.
I noticed it in advertising. There's a ton now of interracial couples in advertising. Like, I don't know if you noticed
Yeah.
this.
Oh,
It's
the
really
really uproar about that.
Well,
yeah.
they're doing
Hey,
it.
Right on. There you go.
No, you guys remember the series Xena Warrior Princess?
Oh, yes.
Oh my God, I love that series.
Yeah,
and
boy,
part of
loved
it
her.
was that I mean I know that there was a lot of like subtext in lesbian subtext in that series, and they picked up on it. I think after like the second season, they started actually deliberately putting it in there. And so thank you, producers of Xena Warrior Princess. The Lesbian Nation appreciates your efforts. But anyway, the thing I loved the most about that was that you got these two kick-ass women who are kick-ass in their own right. They're not, carbon copies of each other.
Oh, not
by
at all.
any means.
Yeah.
And they're traveling around getting into these adventures, and it's not about some guy. The story was about the relationship between these two women and how they handle these adventures together.
Yeah.
I thought that's such a powerful story, and I love that.
Yeah.
What's weird to me is I remember as a child, you would play games based on like television characters and
Yes.
stuff. And I remember all the time always being male characters. Like I would pretend with my friends, and I would be Captain Kirk, or I would be, and so I was always being these male characters. And in my head, I'm like, I wonder what like the I guess the cis male community would think about the idea of playing pretend, and they would be the woman. Like they would be a female.
Right.
Like, would you be Lieutenant Uhura? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when we play Star Trek.
Oh, well, when I was a kid, when we played Star Trek, I played with other girls, and somebody would be Spock, somebody would be Captain Kirk. And I said, oh, I want to be Uhura. And they'd say, she's black. And I was like,
Yeah.
You can't be Uhura.
so what? To me, it was like, so what?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I got news. I was Kirk, so it's
I was one step ahead of you. I was like, oh.
and nobody told me I couldn't be. So, but it was just funny that my fantasy life as a child revolved around pretending I was a male character. Like that is, and I think about it, and it was so normal to me, right? But this is what we're talking about, is the idea of what happens when you don't see these portrayals. So you put yourself in these,
Wherever you can.
I was still the hero in my fantasies, but I was the guy hero because that's the heroes, that's who they were. So it's an interesting thing. There was an artist that I saw recently. People can probably Google it, but he took all these like I think it was the 1950s ads or something like that with men and women. Super horribly sexist ads. And he switched them around to do like the men and women roles differently. The gender roles are switched. And he redid them. And when I saw the ads, it was really interesting to me because they're kind of disturbing on a gut level. Like you see it and you're just like, this is not okay. And I can remember like all my life thinking to myself, and he did it because he had heard a sexist conversation between two of his older relatives. And that's what kind of spawned him to think about like, why would somebody want that, pine for the time when women were your slaves? And so he did this installment. But for me, the interesting thing was that all my life I'd seen ads like this, and I kind of thought to myself, what does this do to women to see themselves portrayed in this kind of slave role, right? But this time when I saw those ads, I felt kind of sick as a woman looking at these ads and feeling like this disturbs me to think of myself in this kind of oppressing, dominating, slave-owning role. Like, I don't like seeing myself portrayed that way. That's disturbing. That's what disturbed me. And for the first time in my life, I thought, what does it do to a guy to grow up with these ads? I always thought to myself, like, what does it do to women to grow up with these ads? And then I saw this and I was like, man, what is that? That must mess with your head to be always portrayed, And I remember talking to a male friend of mine who said that when he was little, he's like, before I understood what sex was and I had this concept of like men and women in these relationships, he's like, I used to fantasize about women like being my slaves and like I would have all these women who were there doing all these things for me. He's like, that was kind of my concept, my pre-sexual concept of men and women.
Lord.
I'm like, no wonder. Like, look at these messages.
And you see this in certain like very fundamentalist religious communities, the Quiverful movement and things like that, where women
Man is the head of the house.
Well, this is where it comes from, right? It's basically that whole Christian overlay concept on what is the relationship? What should it be? And that's what we were talking about before the show, was the concept of the Christian model, which is, cis-het men, cis-het women, they get together, they have children, this is all that exists, right? And they are in such denial in all of their rhetoric about anything outside of that. They just erase it, right? So I remember seeing a wedding, a Christian wedding between two older people, right? Like people in the generation older than me, which is a pretty older generation. And they were getting remarried at an older age. And the ceremony was all about, men and women coming together to have children and stuff. And like, this is what marriage is for. And I'm going, wow, this is a big disconnect, right? Because you're marrying people that are way past child-rearing age here. So they couldn't even craft the ceremony. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but the ceremony that they did was for the reproducing couple that's, and I'm like, wow. So gays don't exist, trans people don't exist, and women fit into this slave role in the relationship, and the guy is the ruler in the house, and, he's supposed to take her into consideration and stuff, but in the end, he's the law. And, yes, it's what has Calvinistic views and these in some ways Catholicism plays into it, but for us in the U.S., I think it's mainly a Protestant concept. And that has driven so many biases and like the entire structure of our society to the point that you can almost not decouple Christian framework from social realities, because they have crafted the society. We've been trying to break out of it since people have decided that they are allowed to break out of it.
Well, initially, I am not a biblical scholar, and don't pretend to be one on TV or either, but the Bible itself was crafted by men to exclude women and make it better for men to run things. And so it's self-perpetuating. it goes way, way back. And fighting that in this day and age, it doesn't seem like it should be that hard.
Well, I mean, when you talk about the Bible, they had goddesses, right? So there's goddesses, and even what was it, Yahweh, or the one before Yahweh? So you had Yahweh, but he was like the
there was
El. Yeah. So El had a wife,
yeah,
Ashtoreth, and she was worshipped in the temples by the Jews along with God, right? So him and his wife were both worshipped. And there's passages about the king Hezekiah that are in the Bible, who was a reformist, I guess, and he decided that there was going to be this monotheistic thing where they were going to get rid of these other. So he had them remove the poles of Asherah and take them out of the temple because he didn't like that. He wanted to just have this like monotheistic sort of male-dominated religion. But the fact that he's taking this stuff out of the temples demonstrates that it was in the temples, right? Yep. So, I mean, it was there.
It used to.
And so there's this mention of her. There's a mention of Sophia, who was like the goddess of wisdom, and she speaks in, I think it's Proverbs. I want to say Proverbs, but so the wisdom speaks. And when I grew up in church, they were like, "Oh, this is just a personification of wisdom." And it's like, isn't every god the personification of something? Like, isn't that pretty much what a god is?
Yeah.
So she actually had cults and things, and it turns out that when you learn more about it, it wasn't just a literary, piece of art there. It was actually that there was this goddess, and she was worshipped even up into the Christian era. So it's interesting to me that there was this female presence, and there's like a whole school of thought around the idea that the Virgin Mary was reinfused into it in order to make up for that lost feminist aspect to the older religion that was removed. It's kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah. Her place, though, in it all is just what they need to keep going like they do, though. I mean, her place is a vessel.
Yeah, but there's I'm just saying there's volumes written on the sort of lost femininity of that particular religion and how it was defeminized and then refeminized.
Right. Well, that makes sense. They got to have the women in there somewhere.
Yeah.
The women folk.